Hey leader, and welcome to episode number 315 of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Bare Tongue Advisors. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes over on our YouTube channel, so make sure you check out that as well. And to all of you who've been listening to the podcast for a while, thank you so much for being a listener. And if the podcast has made an impact on your life, it would mean the world to me if you would leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders. In fact, I want to highlight a recent review that was left by Zoverflow. Zoverflow said this: "Great conversations. I love the L3 Leadership Podcast. Doug is a great interviewer and always seems to be able to get great insight out of the leaders he has conversations with. If you're hungry to keep leveling up as a leader, this pod is for you." Thank you so much, Zoverflow. And for all of you who may leave a rating and review, thank you in advance for that. Well, leader, we just hosted our second annual L3 one-day conference on April 1st, and it was an incredible day. In fact, we'll be posting some of the talks on YouTube and on the podcast in the weeks and months to come, so get ready for that. But today, we're actually going to post the first talk from the conference, which was my talk, which was entitled "Stop Leading on Empty." And in my talk, I actually shared the lessons that I learned in the hardest season of my life, which was the fall of 2020. And when I shared this lesson, after I got down from the stage, I can't tell you how many leaders came up to me, many of them with tears in their eyes, saying, "Doug, I'm in the exact same season that you were in. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for being vulnerable. And hey, can we meet for coffee? Because I'd love to learn how you got through that season." I had other leaders come up to me and saying, "Doug, I feel like I've been leading on empty for a long time, and I feel like I'm about to enter into what you entered into if I don't make some changes. Can you help me make some changes?" And so leaders, this is extremely important. I don't want any of you to ever have to deal with what I had to deal with in the fall of 2020, and you can avoid this. And that's my whole goal of the talk. If I can help one person avoid a season like I had in the fall of 2020, then sharing this was an absolute win. And so if there's anything I can ever do for you, if you're listening to this and you're going through a hard season, please feel free to reach out to me. I have a huge heart for people who are going through tough seasons like this, and I really hope that this talk will lead you to stop leading on empty for the rest of your life and actually fill yourself up, take seasons of rest, etc. And so you're going to enjoy this talk, but before we dive into that, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Bare Tongue Advisors. The financial advisors at Bare Tongue Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Bare Tongue Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baretongueadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities, investments, products, and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Bare Tongue Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. And my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers, and we just had a wonderful experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that gets engaged and comes into their store, they give them a book to help them prepare for their marriage, which is so important. And we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And with all that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my talk from L3 One Day: Stop Leading on Empty. Enjoy. Hey everyone. Wow, Bill was incredible, and really, there's a man in the room that changed my life named Larry Betancourt. He's in the back row, I see him right now. Larry changed my life as a young man, and I interned for him, and one thing he would do was bring in great leaders from around the city, just like Bill, to expose us to great leadership. And then he would encourage us, hey, if Bill inspired you, or whoever you listen to inspired you, you should ask them out to coffee, or get involved with whatever they're doing, get connected, and see what happens. And that's what actually led me to, for 10 years straight, I would ask leaders out to coffee every single month, and I'd come with a list of questions and just ask them to mentor me, and Larry gave me this whole process, and it really changed my life, and it was really what was the catalyst for starting the podcast. But part of our vision for this conference is to expose you to great leaders, right? I believe that leadership is taught, and you're going to hear a lot of great things, but I believe leadership is more caught than taught, and sometimes we just need exposed to the right leaders, which is why it's so important to be in the room. This is so much different than just watching a TED Talk online or something important, so I would encourage you with all the speakers that you're hearing to today, if you feel inspired to get connected, get connected. I mean, I'm not promising that Bill's going to go out to coffee with you. It sounds like a schedule. I mean, you are the Dalai Lama. Choices. But hey, dream big and go for it, and ask big. And so I just wanted to encourage you with that. Today I want to talk to you about, I called the title of my talk, Stop Leading on Empty. Stop leading on empty. And we canceled the conference in February or March, I guess, of 2020. Little did I know that a few months later, it was July. I was getting ready for vacation. COVID was everywhere. And I got a cold. I got sick. And I had no idea if I had COVID. And I was leaving for vacation the upcoming Sunday. My father-in-law was worried, and I was worried I wasn't going to be able to go on vacation. He was traveling with us, and I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to spread COVID on the plane. I don't know if I can go on vacation. I really, really need a vacation right now. I'm stressed. I'm burned out. And so I actually was sitting on the couch. I was watching the Bulls documentary on Netflix. Anyone watch that? So good. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. But I was watching that, and all of a sudden, my heart started racing, beating out of my chest, and I thought like I was going to die. And unfortunately, I did recognize what it was. It was a panic attack. I'd struggled with 2 seasons of panic in my life prior to this at different ages of my life. So I had this huge panic attack, ended up getting through it, and I thought, hey, it was just the result of a bunch of stress. Got through the panic attack, found out I didn't have COVID, went on vacation. I said I had the most 2 relaxing weeks of my life, but looking back, I would wake up at like 5 a.m. on vacation and literally sprint up like a 3,000-foot mountain and down, and then hike all day with my kids. I'm like, yeah, that probably wasn't rest, Doug. But that was my vacation, so I had vacation for 2 weeks. It was great. I get back, and it was Monday night from vacation, just went back to work, and I was playing my brother in chess on my phone. And I guess I was multitasking. Anyone would play chess, but I was multitasking. I saw an email that said, it was from my aunt. She said, Doug, your cousin Nancy passed away of COVID. And that made me sad. I had a relationship with her, but not a deep relationship. But for some reason, that set off anxiety in me again. And that night, I had another panic attack. And that night led to another night with a panic attack, and another night with a panic attack. And pretty much for the entire month of September, I had to deal with anxiety and panic attacks for an entire month straight. I was scared to go to bed every single night because I was fearful of having one. I would sleep 2 or 3 hours a night. It was a miserable experience. Shortly after that, when we moved into October, I don't know what physically happened in my body, but the anxiety moved from my chest, like I feel like I'm going to die here, to my brain. And I can't really describe the feeling in my brain, but it was the worst, most torturous feeling that I've ever physically had. And it started to impair how I was living my everyday life. I remember that we were having a team meeting, and we were all on Zoom at this point. But I remember I was leading our team meeting, and I got to the end. Fortunately, I made it through the meeting. But I remember at the end, I just felt like everything got drained out of me. And I don't know if my team heard me, but I just said, I can't do this. And I got off of Zoom, and I tried to pull up my email, and I couldn't even look at an email. I couldn't respond to an email. I tried to take a nap and then, go back I could not do any work. The next day, the same thing. And so I opened up to our directors at Light of Life, and I just said, you guys know I've been struggling with something. It's getting even worse. I don't know what to do. I don't even know if I can work. And my executive director was like, well, hey, you need to take some time off. And that freaked me out because I like to go hard. I like to do things. And it freaked me out, and I thought, well, I don't know if I'll ever come back if I take time off. Like, if I take a week off, I may never work again. And then fearful thoughts going through my head were like, I don't know if I have long-term disability. I know there's some insurance people in here. Maybe we could talk after. But I don't know that I have the long-term disability in place to take care of my family if I'm never going to be able to work again. It was a real fear. And because of whatever the funkiness in my brain was, I literally felt like I was going to die every single day. I thought at any minute, I'm going to die. My number one question for my friends and for my wife, and my Laura could tell you, if I asked her once, I asked her 10,000 times, am I going to die? Am I going to be okay? She was pregnant with my son, who was born last year, and I remember crying and screaming at the top of my lungs, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to see my son again. It was the darkest season of my life, and I was desperate, and so I looked for information. I was reading every book that I could. I was looking for TED Talks, and I'll share a lot about what I learned. And I read this book called Leading on Empty by Wayne Cordeiro. And if you've ever struggled with this, I highly recommend it as a read. But in it, he said that he went through a very similar season, and his doctor basically said, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm not saying this is true, but it made sense to me. He said, basically, your body runs on serotonin, and once your serotonin gets depleted, your body starts running on adrenaline. And once you start running through adrenaline, your body starts to have panic attacks, and you start to run on anxiety. And if you keep going hard when you're in that season of anxiety, you eventually have a mental breakdown. And it was kind of a wake-up call to me of, I think I'm pretty far down that road. Very, very scary place. And so what led to this? You know, I literally was like, it could be 1,000 different things, but looking back, I think it was 3 main things that it boiled down to. Number 1 was unprocessed grief and trauma. What I didn't share with you was just 9 months earlier, I have a sister. I don't have time to tell her whole story, but I had a sister who was a heroin addict for 15 years, and Light of Life and my family walked her through that. My sister ended up homeless twice in that period in our programming at Light of Life multiple times. And unfortunately, in December of 2019, we lost my sister to an overdose. Today's actually my sister's birthday. She'd be 35. But we lost her to an overdose, and I remember getting the call. I'm laying in bed, sleeping. Get the phone call, 11:30 at night. My dad says, Doug, Sarah's gone. Sarah's gone. The police just left the house. And he was obviously, understandably, a mess. And so, I freaked out. I'm like, I got to go help my dad. So I got in my car, and I cried for probably 2 minutes. Got to my dad's house. He was a mess. Took care of my dad. Stayed with my dad for pretty much the whole week. Put together a message. Put together all the funeral arrangements. Put together a great message to honor my sister's life. She has 2 sons, so I raised a ton of money for my nephews. And then I basically just went back to work. And my boss actually said that exact thing. He said, did you actually why don't you take more time? And I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm good. I know my sister's in a better place. I know I'll see her again one day. I know that she had a personal relationship with God. I'm good. And I just pressed on and keep pushing through. Little did I know that I had never processed that grief and trauma, and I'll talk about that. The second thing that and let me say this about trauma. I did want to bring this up. I realized that I've had a lot more traumatic experiences in my life than I had thought. I lost my sister. I lost my mom when I was 17 years old. I lost my mother-in-law when I was 19 years old. I've lost both of my grandparents. I've had a lot of loss in my life. A lot. And at Light of Life, we talk a lot about trauma-informed care. And we say that the average adult, by the time they reach adulthood, has had at least one traumatic event in their life. The average adult who walks through our doors at the Mission has had 3 or 4 by the time they reach 18, and multiple thereafter. And I don't know if you've ever done a trauma assessment of your life, but I'm willing to bet that you've had more trauma and grief in your life than you probably are willing to admit or even be aware of. It's a big deal. The second thing that led to the season of my life was just stress, burnout, and unrealistic expectations of myself internally. Stress, burnout, and unrealistic expectations. I talked about how I love to go hard. And I prided myself on it, and I don't do that anymore. But hey, I go hard, I do all these things, look at me, and I'll talk about all that. But I remember I had just become director at Light of Life. I had management roles before, but I had never led an entire department or sat at an executive leadership level, and I was at that level. And the amount of pressure that I put on myself, no one put pressure on me, the amount of pressure I put on myself was insane. We had just kicked off a $24 million capital campaign relocation effort. We decided to rebrand the organization, and we decided to switch vendors that I actually thought could have a significant positive impact or a significant negative impact. And all summer long, I actually remember leading up to this, I would wake up with cold sweats. 1, because of the fact that it was reality my sister was gone. And 2, my thinking was, if these 2 decisions aren't right at Light of Life, Light of Life's not going to exist and it's going to be my fault. That's pretty ridiculous thinking, but that's how I think. I'm an all or nothing person. And I put all the weight of these 2 decisions, which really were not that big of a deal. They're a big deal, but not game-changing for an organization that's going to shut it down. But the weight of that just crushed me. And I had a pastor who, I don't know if he's here yet, but he's coming today, John Nuzzo. And he said, Doug, as I've looked over your life, when you were a teenager, you saw your mom get sick, and she was sick for your teenage years, and you medicated the pain of that through drugs and alcohol. Then you became a person of faith after your mom passed away, which was great, but then you started medicating through performance. And that's what I've done my whole life. I had such unrealistic expectations because everything I was doing was to prove that I'm something, to prove that I'm enough to mask the pain and grief that I never was willing to deal with. The third reason I think what led to that season was a spiritual battle. Again, this is not a faith conference. I am a person of faith, and so I do believe it was a spiritual attack in my life. And I listened to a lot of sermons during that time, and one of the pastors said something that resonated with me that I thought was worth sharing with you. But he just said, the reason that some battles are so tough is that you can't see it in the spiritual, but the enemy is doing his best to squash an acorn before it becomes a mighty oak tree. A mighty oak tree. And that really gave me a vision that, hey, if I can get through this, there's something better on the other side. I'm going to be able to help more people on the other side. I'm going to be more of who God wants me to be on the other side of this. I think it was a spiritual attack. So those three things I think are what led to this season of my life. And what I want to spend the rest of the talk sharing with you is what I learned, and hopefully this will help you as well. So the first thing that I learned through this entire process in healing is that you are not alone. And I am not alone, and I was not alone. And if you're struggling with these things, you're not alone either. It shocked me when I started opening up to people what I was going through, how many people said they have gone through the exact same thing. It was so freeing. I started reading books like Leading on Empty and started listening to messages by some of my heroes who I look up to. I remember one guy, Louis Giglio, he said he went through a season like this in 2008. He said he could not get off the couch. And when he says he couldn't get off the couch, he said, I couldn't even walk around the block. I couldn't go to the grocery store. I never thought I'd get off the couch again. And he said, if you would have told me that I'd be speaking again one day or working again one day, I would have told you I have a better chance of riding a bicycle on Jupiter. Do you know how freeing it was to know that I wasn't the only one dealing with something like this? Another mentor I met with said, Doug, I don't know one leader that I'm friends with that hasn't gone through something like this. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Your body's just simply telling you that what you're doing now, the way you're living, is not sustainable. Your body is trying to save your life. That's all that's happening. And so you need to make some changes. But you're not alone. You're not alone. And as leaders, maybe you're not struggling with this, but I would tell you there's probably people in your organization who are. And are you going to be the kind of leader and create the kind of organizational culture that can actually deal with some of these issues and actually let people know that it's okay to not be okay, that they're not alone and that you can actually walk them through it? I'm glad I was part of an organization like that. The second thing I learned was it's more than okay to get help. It's more than okay to get help. And so immediately, again, when you're desperate, you'll do anything. So I reached out to a therapist that was recommended to me. It was amazing. I had never gone to therapy before. My thought was, I'm connected with a ton of leaders. I meet with leaders all the time. I'm in mastermind groups. I have tons of community around me. I process with everyone. I'm good. I don't need therapy. I needed it. I wish I would have started it a lot longer. Maybe I would have avoided this whole season. There's a lot in leadership. Sometimes people think therapy is weak. I would tell you that therapy is for the strong. But in therapy, I learned so many helpful things that I think will be practical to you. One is just the power of sharing with others. I talked about this already, but if you're going through something, share it with someone. Don't hold it all inside. You don't have to be tough. Admit that you're going through a hard time. And you'll be surprised at what happens when you just allow yourself to express what's happening to you. The second thing that was super helpful was, again, I was so worried about not being able to work again. So I talked to my therapist and I just said, talk to me about capacity. Because I liked the capacity that I was utilizing, and I want to be able to do that again. And he said, Doug, in my experience, what I've learned about capacity is oftentimes it's not a capacity issue. There's people that can sleep 3 or 4 hours a night for their entire lives, work 16-hour days, and be absolutely fine. What I found when it comes to capacity is usually when you burn out, it's a result of unrealistic expectations of yourself internally. This is huge. Unrealistic expectations of yourself internally. Now, I already told you about the expectations that I put on myself for Light of Life, but that's how I was in every area of my life. Literally, when it comes to L3 leadership, like if I don't have the influence and leadership level skills of John Maxwell, then I feel like I'm doing nothing. This is how I live my life. If I don't have the financial world of Dave Ramsey, then I'm not doing well financially. If I don't look like The Rock, which I have that one taken care of, but if I don't look like The Rock, I'm out of shape. I'm weak. That is how I live my life in every area of my life, constantly comparing myself, constantly putting these expectations that were unrealistic on myself, and it led to burnout and stress. And so we had to do some work in therapy. And so we did this work around evaluating my beliefs. And what we found is, and I don't have time to share the whole process, but my negative core belief that was driving all of this was that I'm not enough. I'm not enough. That pastor told me, I've been medicating through performance. Everything I was doing was to prove to myself that I'm enough. And so my therapist said, draw a T-chart in your journal. And on the left side, I want you to fill out the evidence that you have that you're not enough. What evidence do you have? And what I wrote down was basically 2 traumatic experiences that I had with leaders that they spoke something into my life that was negative, and that was still sticking with me to this day. And I was trying to prove something to those people. It wasn't evidence that I'm not enough. It was evidence that I was letting a pain and a trauma from the past dictate how I live my everyday life. What I realized was there's very little evidence. In fact, there was none that I'm not enough. So then he said, well, on the other side, start writing down evidence that you are enough. So I started writing down some cliche things, and he said, no. I want you to make a big list. And I started writing things I'm grateful for, things in my life, my wife, my kids, all these things. I graduated high school with a 1.6. Like, I should not be doing anything that I'm doing today. And I just started crying, and I realized I have all the evidence in the world to say that I'm enough. All the evidence in the world. And that was such a freeing exercise. Now, I called my dad, and I know you guys know my dad, but he's like Pittsburgh dad. He's the best. He's a bus driver. I love my dad. He has a saying. He said, I am what I am, and that's all that I am. I'm Johnny, the bus driving man. Like, just be comfortable with who you are. Isn't that a great saying? My dad was always secure in who he was, but I wasn't. And so I was sharing him these feelings that, Dad, I'm processing that I'm not enough, and that's how I've been living my life. And my dad, I'm a words of affirmation guy, if you know the 5 love languages. I love being told that I'm awesome, so, if you want to tell me I'm awesome in between, that'd be awesome. And awesome is basically the only adjective I have in my, dictionary. But I was talking to my dad, and my dad said, Doug, this is over the phone, I was walking. He said, Doug, people always come up to me and they say, you must be so proud of your son. Like, look at everything he's doing. And my dad said, I am proud of him. But I'd be just as proud of him if he was cleaning toilets or doing anything else, like he's my son. And man, I'm going to cry down. And it was awesome. Man, I'm enough. I heard that from my dad. It was so freeing. And then I forget how we got on this subject. I was laying everything on the table. I'm like, man, should I not work at Light of Life anymore? Should I not work? Should I just take a sabbatical for 3 months? But I'm like, but what about my job? And we got on the subject of titles. And I'm like, what if I don't have my current position? And my dad just said, like my dad would always say, he goes, Doug, I don't give a what your title is. And I was like, what? I'm like, that is a chapter in a book one day. Like, I don't get, and do you know what? As leaders, sometimes we take ourselves way too seriously and we're way too wrapped up in our titles. And do you know that no one gives a about your title? Do you know that? That was so freeing for me to learn. I'm loved for who I am. I'm not loved for what I do or what position I hold. I'm enough. Evaluate your core beliefs. I learned the power of journaling. Not going to spend a lot of time here, but if you don't journal, I created an entire course on journaling that you can take. I'm a huge proponent of that. I think I filled like 3 journals more than I normally do in a year through this season. But actually being able to process on paper was huge. I had a safety plan. This was huge. My therapist gave me a safety plan. And it was a 10-step plan. And he said, when you start to get in trouble, just follow this plan. Step 1 was like, hey, turn on worship music. Step 2 was listen to a sermon. Step 3 was pray. Step 4 was go for a walk. Step 5 was call a friend. Step 6 was call Laura. And I just want to point out that Laura was step 6. I always went to Laura step 1. And Laura was pregnant at the time with my son, right? She's also an executive, and she was stressed and busy and trying to run our kids while I'm like laying there in bed saying, am I going to die? Help me, help me, help me. And so I would grab her hand and say, Laura, help me. And she would say, have you done the other 5 steps yet? Leave me alone. Very loving wife. But she did get to a point where she said, I can't be everything to everyone. And I share that because, listen, you may not be the one going through a season like that, but you may be married to someone going through a season like that. You may have a coworker that's like that or a team member. And you need to walk them through, but you need to get help for you too. Laura needed a community to process with and a therapist to process with just as much as I did, because she was carrying the weight of carrying me through a dark season. Be willing to get help. And then after that plan was, call the therapist, call Resolve, which is a crisis hotline, and then the last step would be go to Western Psych. But having a plan to actually go to was so helpful and freeing. Have a plan. And the last thing I learned from my therapist is take medication. if you need it. I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to say like you should, but I was probably not open to it before that, but I was desperate, and so I was open, and I took medication, and it was fine, and it helped me. Be okay with that. Do what you need to do to get healthy in the season that you're in. A few other lessons. Take time to grieve your losses. Take time to grieve your losses. And it doesn't just have to be a lost one, like I lost a bunch of family members. You can grieve a lost relationship. You can grieve a lost job. You can grieve something that someone said to you. I thought I grieved my mom's death. I thought I grieved my sister's death, but I didn't. And my therapist said, Doug, he said, you've said goodbye to grief, but you can't say goodbye to something that you never said hello to. You can't say goodbye to something you never said hello to. And so he sent me on this journey. First, he had me have a trauma assessment, and on a piece of paper, write down every 5-year increment in my life and write down the traumatic experiences that happened over the course of each of those 5 years. And I already mentioned I had a lot of trauma, specifically around lost loved ones. He then said, Doug, I want you to go to the grave sites of each person that you lost, and I want you to write them a letter. I never went to my mom's gravesite. I never went to any gravesite. I thought it was a waste of time. I'm a leader. I got to get things done. They're not there. What's the point? Sorry. That's how I process things. Man, I went to my sister's gravesite with my journal in my hand. And I sat down and I wrote, Dear Sarah, and I lost it. I lost it. Then I went to my mother-in-law. Then I went to my mom. I went to my grandparents. It was one of the most freeing exercises of my life. Have you taken time to grieve the losses in your life? It matters. Keith Anderson said, most people don't expect the amount of loss and grief that surfaces when you are finally quiet. And it took me almost having a mental breakdown to get quiet enough to actually grieve the losses that I've been experiencing for so long. The next thing I would tell you, and let me just say this. No, I'll skip that. The next thing I would tell you to do is you need to invest in deep friendships as a leader. You need to invest in deep friendships. When you're in crisis, you call the people that you think will help the most and that you're closest to. Zach Blair's in the room. I called Zach, Pastor Larry, Will Host. I called the people that love me and are great friends. And they all took time. They stopped what they were doing in their life. And they said, whatever you need, let's go out to eat. Let's go for a walk. I don't know if they would have called me if I would have responded the same. I hope I would have. But there's a fear in me that I might have said, well, I can't. I have too much going on. And so we went on walks with friends, and what I've noticed in a pattern in every single walk that I had with a friend is they all said the same thing. They said, Doug, you've been neglecting deep friendships for a long time. And see, I have thousands of relationships. I have thousands of people I know, and so I thought I had great relationships. And I did, but I don't have deep relationships. Pastor Larry said, Doug, who are the people who don't care what you do, who don't know you for L3 leadership or light of life, that just love you for you, that know you as Bubba, right? My nickname from 3 to 27. Anyway, so invest in deep friendships. You can see Pastor Larry, Zach, and I. And over the past 2 years, I had a mentor give me this exercise. He said, Doug, you really need to prioritize and determine what roles you want to live out of, and not R-O-L-E-S. And I said, that's easy. I want to be a great husband. I want to be a great father, a friend, and a leader. He said, Doug, that's a great aspiration, but you're not living that way. You're not living that way. You're living the opposite. You're trying to be a leader first, and that's way above anything else that you're prioritizing. Again, trying to prove myself. He said, drop the leader thing. Focus on being a good husband, a good friend, and a good father. And I haven't been perfect at it, but that has been a main focus of mine for the past few years, and it's been extremely freeing. Maybe you need to determine your roles and call a good friend this week. The next thing I learned is that I needed to prune some things out of my life. My pastor said, when he talked to me about medicating performance, he said, you're going to have to look at everything in your life and prune stuff. The hard part for you, Doug, is that everything you're pursuing is noble. L3 leadership's great, light of life is great. It's not like you have all these unhealthy addictions. So it's going to be really challenging you to do that. But you need to take the time to figure out what to prune in your life and put everything on the table. And he asked a great question. I think I already mentioned it today, but he just said, you have to ask yourself, what does healthy look like in this season? What does healthy look like in this season? Doesn't mean it has to look like this forever, but what does it have to look like in this season? And so for me, these may sound like minor things, but they were big things. I cut out social media, which was huge for me. I didn't miss it as much as I thought I would. I actually thought it was really freeing, although now I'm back on the wagon. Come on. They got me. Zucks, come on. But I cut out social media. I got off of coffee, which I used to spend $1,500 a year at Starbucks. And then I convinced Laura to buy this really nice coffee maker, and I'm like, hey, I won't go to Starbucks if we buy this. And then it made like unbelievable coffee. If you want to know what it is, it's a Jura E8. It's amazing. But we bought it. I got to use it for like 3 months, and now it's a glorified hot water maker. Laura still gets to use it for coffee, but I gave up coffee, which was huge. And then I gave up working out, and not working out consistently, but I would go for a walk rather than do some high intensity thing, which was all of my workouts. And I let myself sleep. Like I used to pride myself on waking up at 4 a.m. and having this awesome morning routine and going hard. And I just let my body rest. And thankfully, that was very helpful in the process season. But what do you need to prune? What does healthy look like in this season for you? And the last thing that I learned is just the power of rest. I attended, and again, this is talk about one idea, one connection away. I went to a conference called Catalyst in 2008, and Rick Warren, who's a pastor, was speaking, and he gave this phrase, and it stuck with me ever since, although I didn't implement it for 13 years, but he said, leaders, you need to rest. And he said, every leader needs to divert daily, withdraw weekly, and abandon annually. Divert daily, withdraw weekly, abandon annually. He said, every day, if you work with your head, at night you need to do something with your hands. Every day you need to find something to energize yourself. Every week, withdraw weekly. Every week you need to take a day off where you do nothing. You turn off your phone, you turn off your email, you disconnect completely. In our faith circle, we call it the Sabbath. And I'd never taken a Sabbath before this season. And I read an incredible book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And there was a guy named John Ortberg. He was getting mentored by a man named Dallas Willard, and he was stressed. And in a season like I was going through, he said, "What do I need to do?" And Dallas said, "You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life." That's going to be the battle of my lifetime, I can just tell you that. But you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Withdraw weekly. Turn off the phone. Enjoy your family. The thing that sold me on Sabbath was pleasure stacking. Basically, you just come up with a bunch of fun stuff to do, and you just do that. Sold. Any Enneagram 7s out there? Right? Bucket list. Let's go. Sabbath. Rest. And some new rhythms that Laura and I implemented. One is I try to sleep as long as I can, at least on weekends. Hey, if that's 8 hours, great. But let my body rest. We are committed, as long as we are able to go on 2-week vacations. Because for me, it takes me an entire week just to unwind, to even get ready to rest, and then I'm back to work. So trying to take extended rests, taking advantage of 3-day weekends, trying to do consistent overnights with Laura, scheduling time with deep friendships on the calendar, and just making time for joy, peace, and reflection. Leaders, we need to rest, or else you're going to have a mental breakdown like I did. Rest. So as I close today, a few recommended resources if you're a resource person. I already mentioned Leading on Empty by Wayne Cadero, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer, Take a Day Off by Robert Morris, great book. And then a book that really helped me by Dr. Daniel Amen, who's a brain doctor. He wrote a book called Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. It was really, really incredible and had a lot of practical things relating to these issues. And so why did I share this today? The number one reason I shared this talk is so you don't have to go through what I went through. If I can help one person here avoid I wouldn't wish what I went through on my worst enemy. That's how bad it was. If I can stop one leader from experiencing what I experienced, then this talk was a win for me. I hope that you'll avoid that. The second thing is, and I don't have to tell you this, mental health issues are a huge deal right now in our nation. Student and suicide rates are skyrocketing. The opioid epidemic took over 100,000 people's lives last year. People were burnt out. Mental health issues are everywhere. And as leaders, we need to be equipped to deal with this in our organizations. I said, does your team have a plan for dealing with mental health issues? If they don't, you need to get one. I think, my team's up there. You were like, who are all those people? So this is our development team at Light of Life. We were on a development retreat, so it's a fun picture. But I'm so grateful that I work at a place where people could love me no matter what I was going through. And our team has gone through high highs together, and we've gone through low lows together. We've laughed together, we cried together. And when I was at my lowest, these people walked me through it. They stepped up for me where I needed help. They gave me grace when I couldn't even lead a meeting anymore. I'm so grateful that I had a team in an organization like this. Check in with your team members. Some people on our team are here and they don't like this, but we do check-ins every day in our meetings. We love them. I see Colleen laughing. I make everyone tell me how they're doing on a scale of 1 to 10. We do it in our mastermind groups too. 10 being the best you've ever done, 1 being, life's not so great. And what if you had a measure like that and you had a culture like that where someone could say, you know what, I'm a 1 today. Life's not going too good. And you can all of a sudden stop all the business and say, how can we help you? Let's walk you through this. And leaders, if we'll learn some of the lessons that I had to learn the hard way, I believe that we'll create a better world. I think we'll create a more healthier United States, our country. I think we'll create healthier cities, states, organizations, etc. But it all starts with you and taking care of your mental health. Thank you so much. I hope this added value to your life. Thank you. Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my talk from my L3 One Day called Stop Leading on Empty. I hope that it added value to your life and impacted you, and I hope that it will help you avoid going through a season like I went through. And if you're going through a season like that now, I hope it gave you some practical tips on how you can get out. I hope it gave you hope that you will get out one day, and you will lead again, and you will do well. So keep going, and if there's anything, as I mentioned, that I can do to help you through the season, if you're going through a difficult season, please let me know. And you can find links to everything that I shared in the talk at l3leadership.org/315. And leader, as always, I want to challenge you that if you really want to 10x your growth this year, then you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 5 years. If you don't know what they are, they're simply groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow, go after their goals together, and to do life together. So if you're interested in learning more about masterminds, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds. And as always, leader, I like to end every episode with a quote, and I'll quote one of my heroes, John Maxwell, today. He said this. He said, "You will never change your life until you change something you do daily." This was huge. I love that quote. I'll share it again. You will never change your life until you change something you do daily. I hope this encouraged you, leaders. Know that Laura and I love you. We believe in you. Don't quit. Keep leading. The world needs your leadership. We'll talk to you next episode.